I don't say that I have got the silver bullet, but we have to find ways to tackle a crisis in advance. And one concept that could be interesting for people working in Stratcom is what we call issue management. Next slide, please. An issue, it's like the embryo that starts somewhere in society by an NGO, media, social media, and it's growing and growing, and it will grow until it's dealt with by policymakers, and we see it in many different places. Or to put it in other words, what we say is an issue is like a crisis, but then in slow motion. This is a picture from 2004. Maybe the young generation hasn't been there yet, but this is Sri Lanka. This is the tsunami beach. Everyone was on the beach. Nothing was going on. The ocean was flat. Everyone's lying in the sun until suddenly this huge wave came. People didn't notice, but the birds and the animals, they noticed. An hour before, they went up to the hills because they sensed that a crisis was coming. So, this is about definition. You've got an incident. This is low impact, but with high pressure. There's a crisis. We talk all these days, both days about crisis, which has a high impact and also a high time pressure. But an issue has a high impact, but a low pressure. And if you neglect an issue, it can lead to a crisis. This is personal for me. We have a farmers' crisis now in the Netherlands, a revolt by farmers going on already for 3 years. They block the highways, they go to the cities, and it's a crisis which has become more than just a farmers' crisis. It's become a crisis of trust against the government. Farmers are also cooperating with other groups who are against the government, and it's really, really difficult now to put this crisis back into its place. And the personal thing for me is that 4 years ago I was the Director of Communications for the Ministry of Agriculture, just before this happened, and I did not see this coming. So, what did I learn? And when we talk about communication, it's about sending out the message, crafting the narrative, it's about the mouth, but we need to be more aware about the ears and the eyes and the brain to look out for the signals, the strong signals, but often also the weak signals. And I tell you, it's easier said than done to implement this in your organization. So I came to the conclusion what we need within a government organization to tackle this crisis in advance is to create what we call organized issue management. An issue management system which could be your, so to say, your blind spot mirror, because you're focused on 10 different strategic issues at the same time, but you forget the 11th one that's coming from behind you. And you have to organize this within your government organization. And also, this sounds simple, but maybe, well, I've worked for 20 years within government. I know how government organizations work or how they don't work. And how do they deal with signals, or how do they don't deal with signals? You have to be aware of that, and you have to change this. Because, how does it go? So a signal comes into an organization, a government organization, and it's landed on the table, and they say, yeah, but well, not now, we're too busy with other priorities, or, yeah, well, it's an issue, but, well, no worries, or, sorry, it's not my issue, you have to bring it to another part of the government. Or, well, this can be negative, let's not bring this to the boss, because, you know, why bring this difficult message? So, sometimes people within government are afraid to speak truth to power, but with the consequences that important signals are neglected. So how does this go within this government organization? Sometimes the signal comes in, but it goes from one department to another, from communication to the policy department, to the legal department, management department, until it comes on the plate of the minister, if it gets there. But most often it does not get there. Somewhere on the line it's put off the table, sometimes for valid reasons. But what's missing is a sort of integral, strategic assignment of these signals. And then we come to issue management, which means that you have to organize this within your government organization. The main thing is that you bring the most important professionals together, communication strategy, management, policy, legal, so you get this integral assessment of the signals. And before that, you need a monitoring unit, which is more than a media press office. It's about getting all these signals into the organization, media, social media, public service, well, all different kind of instruments. And then you get to an assessment and bring it up to the political level. And then you can come to, in time, come to strategic adjustments before it turns into a crisis. Well, to finish, there are a lot of instruments you can work with, like an issue heat map, because sometimes a signal, it's still weak and you have to ignore it, but sometimes it's getting hotter. Well, there are a lot of instruments if you want to work on issue management. But finally, we introduced it within the Dutch National Police Organization. They work with this now. They can handle a crisis more in advance than they did. And, but in the end, it's all about signals, hearing, listening, and not only about talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And I will have some questions about that at the end. And our second presenter is Başa from Top University. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I've been asked to talk about another crisis topic, which is migration and the communication of migration. And at this rate, with the drivers of migratory movements becoming more forceful and additional drivers being included into our models, such as the climate change, environmental drivers, it seems like we will be facing this issue a lot more, and we'll be facing the challenge of communicating migration a lot more. Now, what I'll be reflecting on today is based on where I come from. I'm an academic, and it is the academic work I have been conducting and other scholars have been conducting on the communication of migration and its impact, especially on perceptions and in particular public opinion. And this communication can be done through government institutions. This communication can be done by public media agencies or private media agencies. But at the end of the day, we tend to sometimes not be very methodological, not be very systematic about the implications of the kind of communication we are doing and even the ones that we're not doing. Let's take a step back and remember any information provided through public communication, regardless of the medium, has important and multiple impacts on public opinion. I will talk about 5 impacts in particular. The first one is setting the agenda. It is a particular choice to talk about an issue or not to talk about an issue. When it comes to migration, we can ignore the issue, we can ignore migrants are coming, we can pretend it doesn't happen and not talk about it. And a lot of governments today choose this, do run a lot of the policies under the radar, but we're talking about the people, and that means these people are being encountered by other people at times. And when the numbers are increasing or when the migrants become more visible, then it becomes hard to ignore. And then you are faced with a choice how to talk about this issue, how to set the agenda. I will get back to this very shortly. But let's remember the other ways that communication impacts perceptions. The second way is through especially the media, the communication has a limiting and directing impact on policymakers as a way of being a watchdog. You know, give us the correct numbers, give us the real policy challenges. What are the policy options? Help initiate a conversation with the public. So media thus has an important role vis-a-vis the government as well as the public opinion in this regard through being a watchdog. Again, the kind of communication we have, in addition to setting the agenda, it also primes people to think about it, to think about the concept that we're discussing in a certain way. We can talk about migration as a positive thing, we can talk about it as a negative thing, we can talk about it in a balanced way. What we see missing a lot of times, I will also talk about this, is this balance and also the positive conversation about migration. And finally, fourth way is framing. The way we communicate has an important impact on the framing of the issue. Do we talk about migration, international refugee movements, as a human rights issue, as a security issue? This is very important in shaping people's opinions. And unfortunately, around the world, we see this concept of securitization being enacted very widely by policymakers, because it gives them additional area for maneuver in their policy making. They become less accountable. They can become less accountable by presenting migration as a security threat that needs to be tackled right away. So we're going to do the extraordinary way of decision making. But what this does is actually closes up the channels for a reciprocal, open communication and creates a black box where people cannot see through, and that creates a lot of anxiety for people. That is not necessarily considered, unfortunately, much. And this securitization does not have to be done through policymakers. A lot of times now what we see is a bottom-up securitization. People are securitizing, media outlets are securitizing because they see the potential for people clicking on that news more, or the potential for reading this more and getting more advertisement, if you may. And media also creates, when it comes to the issues of migration and migrants, a good communication, I must say, an extended contact. A lot of times, individuals, citizens living in the country do not have direct contact with migrants. They do not know them as a neighbor. They do not know them as colleagues at work. And by telling their stories, they learn about these different groups. Now, it is unfortunate when this extended contact is created on a very negative basis. Now, when we think of the implications, particular implications, I talked about agenda setting, right? So, number one, in the absence of correct information provision, what happens is when you ignore the issue and do not communicate, what these groups are, where they come from, what are their characteristics, why are they coming here, what are they escaping from, if they are here, what are their problems, what are their concerns, then you create a gray zone, which is very fertile ground for fake news and urban myths, unfortunately. And we see this everywhere, and then we see WhatsApp group messages, going in circles, and it is important, therefore, to talk about who they are, where they are coming from. The second thing I would like to talk about, and we find a lot of evidence for this in the media content analysis that we do, is about humanization, or the opposite, dehumanization. I would like to help our translators a little bit, because I did think a lot about this concept. I like to translate this into Turkish as ete kemiğe büründürmek, because at the end of the day, these people are of flesh and bones. They are people, they are humans, but as someone who also works with surveys, with data on migratory flows, we work a lot with numbers, and when you work with numbers, you forget that these are actually human beings. And a lot of the times in the communication we create, especially in the media, we do not hear their stories. Why did they come from? What is the story of this young woman? Every individual has a different story, and every migration is in fact a crisis on its own. So we have looked at the newspapers, and those that actually had a story of a human being had a very positive tone in the content as compared to those who do not have a human face. So it is really important that we set this. And another thing is the number of sources. This is taught widely in communication schools, how important it is to have multiple sources. But in reality, it is sometimes not convenient. You reach out the first source you find, and maybe a second one, and then you write your story, or you communicate through this. But a lot of times, the underrepresented, the minority, the small group, the migrant is part of the story. And when we have to make an additional effort to hear it from their side in order to give a balanced view, a balanced perception, create a balanced perception. And unfortunately, we do ignore this sometimes. So sometimes it's because you don't speak the language, but there are a lot of NGOs that can do this, that can provide this information. So I am happy to talk about the different cases from around the world, to give examples of securitization, for instance, how the migrant caravan coming from Latin America was labeled as people feeding from consisting of ISIS recruits, where it was just Latin Americans. It had nothing to do with this, a clear example of securitization. But we have many examples. I'm happy to talk about them. But I just wanted to remind us that when we talk about communication of migratory crises, migration, we're actually talking about people. And a lot of times we forget this. And if we are living in a country like we do in Turkey, where there are very sizable groups of migrants from different backgrounds, it is very important to set the information correctly in order to prevent social conflict from arising. And I unfortunately do see some bad intentions in some of the fake news being created in terms of galvanizing this kind of conflict. So I do really appreciate that there is now attached to the presidency a center to fight with disinformation, and there were some private NGOs initiatives that were doing this, but it really is an area that grants a systematic methodological effort. So I look forward to their work. I'll be following it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will have some questions to you as well. Our next speaker is Fuat Hüseyinov, Deputy Chairman of the State Committee for Refugees and IDPs for the State of Azerbaijan. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, distinguished panelists, distinguished delegates, media representatives, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, on behalf of delegation of Jan Azerbaijan, I would like to extend sincere welcome to esteemed audience attending Stratcom 22, and I would like to express our deep appreciation and gratitude to Directorate of Communication of Presidency of our brotherly Turkey for extending us kind invitation and generous Turkish hospitality, which went much beyond any praise. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Fahrettin Altun for his thought-provoking opening statement yesterday, which clearly demonstrated present global challenges facing world community in the age of uncertainty caused by wars, conflicts, persecution, violation of human rights, climate change across the continents, with an emphasis on crisis of truth. I am privileged to be a panelist during today's discussion, and since I represent State Committee for Refugees and IDPs of Azerbaijan, in my capacity as Deputy Minister, I would like to focus on the issue of forced migration in the era of uncertainty and new realities after a long uncertainty in the aftermath of 2020 patriotic war from my country's perspective. This year's summit theme is strategic communication in the age of uncertainty. If we turn into classical definition, uncertainty is the only certainty there is. Uncertainty is all around us. And irrespective of whether it's pandemic or health or civil strife, we have certain degree to tolerate uncertainty in our life. But as human beings, we crave security. And all of us have different limits. But no matter how hopeless and helpless we are, it's important to note that there are steps we can take to alleviate sufferings, to reduce anxiety, and to have better situation and better step in order to address uncontrollable circumstances. People at risk, such as forced migrants, refugees, and internally displaced persons, constitute major challenges towards sustainable development and are more vulnerable as opposed to others in the era of uncertainty. Migration, in its various forms, is not a new phenomenon in humanity's history, but beginning of third millennium is characterized very much by largest migratory movement, which involves, in terms of origin, transit, and destination, nearly every part of the world. And in recent years, scope of migration reached an expanded levels, and in most of the cases, people who are fleeing their homes are fleeing because of conflicts, persecution, inhuman treatment, climate change. Despite the goal we set in our global agenda for 2030 to reduce internal displacement by 50%, each year we see unprecedented number of displaced, which is on the rise. And today, Europe faces largest crisis ever since the World War II. And humanity reached the moment when doubled or even tripled efforts for prevention and solution are an absolute necessity. Azerbaijan's sensitivities towards displacement problem, which was declared as problem number one by national leader and founder of Azerbaijani state, Heydar Aliyev, are clearly understandable as a country that has been hosting, in per capita terms, one of the highest caseloads of refugees and IDPs in the last 3 decades, comprising 10% of its overall population. And displacement in my country has been consequence of Armenian aggression and occupation of 20% of Azerbaijani's territory, compounded with ethnic cleansing policy pursued. And had there been no assistance on the part of international organizations and friendly states, and first comes in row, of course, our Brazil and Turkey, the country would have faced a real humanitarian catastrophe at the onset of crisis in the early 1990s, for which we are always thankful and grateful to all those entities who rendered us assistance at the most critical period of Azerbaijan's history. Over the past 3 decades, Azerbaijan gained an enormous knowledge base and experience in dealing with large-scale displacement. To date, 116 new modern residential complexes have been erected in the country, and as many as 320,000 displaced were provided with improved housing. And poverty level among displaced dropped from 75 to 8%. Activities of Azerbaijani state under the leadership of our president, His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, were highly appreciated by the most reputable international organizations, including current UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, in his capacity then as a UN High Commissioner for Refugees in the course of his missions to Azerbaijan. But notwithstanding an exemplary care and attention rendered towards the displaced by national authorities of Azerbaijan, the only durable solution to protracted displacement was closely linked to political settlement of former Armenia-Azerbaijan Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and liberation of Azerbaijani territories that would have enabled hundreds of thousands of our compatriots to exercise their fundamental right to return in safety, dignity, and on a voluntary basis. For almost 30 years, Armenia has kept 20% of Azerbaijani territories under occupation, not complying with UN Security Council resolutions of 1993, demanding full, immediate, and unconditional withdrawal of all occupying forces from occupied territories. And however, glorious victory in a 44-day patriotic war of 2020 put an end to this long-standing conflict and not only reinstated territorial integrity and national sovereignty of Republic of Azerbaijan within its internationally recognized borders, but also created conditions conducive for safe, dignified, and voluntary return of hundreds of thousands of our compatriots to their homeland. At present, Azerbaijani state has a noble task to ensure restoration and sustainable development in liberated areas. Currently, security measures are being undertaken, magnificent infrastructure projects are implemented with an emphasis on smart village and smart city concepts, and I'm pleased to note that the first wave of returnees already started moving back, and we hosted 70 families this summer. Great return, along with reintegration of liberated territories into the national economy, has been declared as one out of 5 national priorities for socio-economic development of Azerbaijan to be achieved by year 2030. And just a few weeks ago, the first state program on great return to liberated areas has been endorsed by presidential decree. But I would like to underline at the same time that Armenia has contaminated a large amount of Azerbaijani lands with mines and other unexploded ordinances to the extent that today, according to international experts, this area is considered to be one of the most mine-polluted areas on the earth. According to our president's statement during Astana Summit, it might take up to 30 years and will involve about $25 billion worth for the total mine clearance exercise. And by refusing to hand over accurate mine maps in full, Armenia continues to grossly violate fundamental rights of hundreds of thousands of IDPs to return to their homes in safety and dignity. But despite this total destruction in the occupied territories and a huge mine issue, we are confident that in the coming few years, Azerbaijan, with support of international community and first of all with support of our Brazilian nation and state of Turkey, will be in a position to present a new model on post-conflict rehabilitation and reintegration of displaced communities in their homelands, and will convert lands once devastated and abandoned, into a real paradise and into a place of peace and prosperity. Restoring justice for IDPs is a solid foundation for any long-term peace and stability in the region. And from that perspective, putting an end to this long-standing conflict means restoration of basic fundamental rights for IDPs. I will conclude here and we can have further talks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Our last panelist is İpek Tekdemir-Rup, Policy and Strategic Communication Advisor at European Parliament.
Thank you. Teşekkür ederim. Thank you, Mr. Kılıç. Thank you very much for everyone for being here today. I particularly would like to thank the organizers, the whole team of Directorate of the Presidency of Communication, and I would like to give them a big applause because they have done a great, great job here in bringing all around the people to this stage and to this conference where East meets West, West meets East in this lovely city, Istanbul. Let me focus on the context, in fact, of our topic discussion. So the global uncertain times that Mr. Kılıç we were discussing actually informally, and your introduction was clearly that I wanted to highlight today. Well, these global uncertain times are not new. In fact, we have been experiencing since 2008 with the economic crisis and with the economic crash right after Arab Spring, Arab Winter, and then we had afterwards Crimea, Brexit, Trump administration, and ongoing war, and COVID-19, and the current nuclear weapon threats, climate change, so on and so forth. So here is my argument and my highlights in regards of public communications. So what was the strategy what was the message that we are in the public institutions were trying to deliver to our society? The message was always, we were in the midst of the crisis and things will get better. And the second, uncertain times, we were in another crisis, then things will get better. We had experienced this 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. I'm asking to our audience here, what happens afterwards? What happens afterwards is it leads the society to mistrust in public institutions and their governments. Exactly what my dear colleague Peter mentioned, that what is happening in Netherlands in the agricultural sector, when there was a crisis and there were mistrust. So here, I would like to emphasize, and by giving this mistrust as an example, didn't we see during the COVID times, didn't we experience that during COVID times, people were reluctant to take vaccines? So I have chosen coronavirus period as a primary example that can reflect the reality to all of us. So we have experienced lots of COVID rumors. 5G towers were attacked. We were believing that Bill Gates put the chip on the vaccines. And I would like to highlight here that we were, in fact, and still are in the era of misinformation. And this spread so quite extensive. What happened in Europe? What happened in the Western countries? This peaked. But I give you a good example of what the UK government developed as a strategy. UK government took action, especially there were ethnic minority groups, and the Muslim communities were reluctant to take the vaccine. So what UK government did, they have used local authorities. They have went to imams. They used mosques, and they transformed these centers as vaccine centers. So in order to convince the society, in order to break this mistrust between the government and the public. So we have seen a great example of the civil engagements that have been developed. And they have also used, as Başa Hocam here mentioned, that the ethnic groups are under the threat, but what the UK government did, as well as during this time, that they have used the ethnic faces on the posters. And they have asked people to go and get done your vaccine. So, at the same time, we were in the period of that decentralization of media. So the government required to build new bridges between their policies and transforming their messages. And they required more partnership. So that's why when we had the digitalization involvement of this, during this process, so people started to listen the instructions of the governments during the digitalization. And digitalization was a really important tool to build this trust back. As well as the government immediately implemented the National Health Service applications in order to access the information as quick as possible. This, in fact, eased for the citizens to reach the information. So what we see here with these examples, the authorities have used the digitalization to build a bridge and build the bridges between public and the government. And they use this increased civic engagements and build up, and they try to build up with the society. If we can't define the problem, how we can build up? That's something that we have lost. And here I would like to quote Professor Freiberg and Sami Hamdi. They were discussing, can we build this trust by using only digital communication? Obviously not. We need human-to-human touch. Today, we are here and we are meeting from all around the world. We are meeting with different backgrounds. We are having actual, real exchange of views. This is what we need. So what can be done to increase this? I would say we need to create more cooperation, and we need to use more influencers, civil societies, and we need to mobilize more local authorities in our communication strategies. So in order to be more open and resilient, I would say we also require to focus on more citizen-centered policies. So here is my final words, obviously, and always goes to the youth. I would like to end my words with an emphasizing on youth's involvement in public communications. So we require to involve more youth in our public communication strategies. So by using digital age, and we can support definitely development of our future and our stronger democracies for a better future, for a more resilient future. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup pour l'attention.
Thank you. We have 15 minutes, but I have tons of questions, so I try to direct one question per the panelist. Peter, the first question. Last week I was in a panel with a former board member of World Health Organization, and he actually told me all of the signals before the pandemic that not only national governments, international bodies were also warning about a potential pandemic coming, but there wasn't enough action, neither by the national governments nor by the international organizations. So my first question is, what did the world know about crisis management following pandemic? And very much related to that, your distinction between the issue and crisis. We have seen right now that there is a quick transformation from an issue to crisis. 2 years ago, we weren't talking about a food crisis, but now we are talking about food crisis. 2 years ago, we weren't talking about an energy crisis, but maybe it was an issue, but we are talking about energy crisis today. And with this rapid transformation, do you think your prescription on how to handle a crisis changed or not?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think sometimes you learn or you remember when you've experienced it. And gladly, these epidemics don't happen so often. So we saw a difference between different countries. There were countries in Southeast Asia who had a SARS epidemic about 10 years ago. They reacted much quicker than, for instance, countries in Western Europe. And also the government organization and communication was not prepared. So it can help if you practice and that you share experiences. But I think from now we've learned, the whole world has learned. What you told, I think that's very valuable, that you communicate also not only from the government, but with whole society. So if you compare which countries were best in their communication, is like what you told, not our country. And because of that, we have to learn from each other. That's why it's very important to be in places like this. And also to learn from this example of COVID to perhaps other potential crises that come, and especially to get these signals earlier and to take them seriously. Yeah.
Thank you. Başakan, my question, Professor Yalçın, my question to you is, you said 5 steps to handle an immigration crisis. Setting the agenda, framing, etc. But this is a good plan, but a good plan of action. But Mike Tyson has this famous word saying that everybody has a plan until they are punched on their face. So when countries face immediate crisis, do you think a country can handle the public communication side of the immigration crisis in those steps? And considering that now there is external interventions, meaning that in many countries there are far-right extremism, which depends on anti-refugee feelings. And those anti-refugee feelings can be contagious, can pass from one country to another in a rather short period of time. When a country faces a significant crisis in a rather short period of time, and when it is facing these external interventions, do you think those 5 steps can work, or do we need additional steps to at least crisis-proof our immigration policy?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. And I will answer by first problematizing the concept of crisis and what is a crisis. At the Hugo Observatory of University of Liège, we are conducting a project on this, an EU project, where we look and find that actually a lot of times when an issue, a migration, is labeled as crisis, is not correlated with the numbers, or it's not correlated with our speed at which people come in. And sometimes it's strongly related to the identity of migrants, or it is a lot of times related to the institutional capacity of the country. So a lot of times the crisis is actually a governance crisis, not a migration crisis. That is why while hosting the largest number of Syrian refugees in Turkey, we never called it a refugee crisis, but the moment the refugees started to cross across the Aegean Sea, it was the European refugee crisis, right? So I think I do sympathize with your question in that the intensity can be very high, but it also depends on how we approach it. And if we think that, oh my God, this is a crisis from the get-go, from the beginning, we are withdrawing from our plan. So I don't think it is a good idea to do away with a plan in the beginning. And to have, regardless of where we can pick up, I think the important communication strategy, a structured communication strategy can be set up. I would like to bring, for instance, an example related to far-right parties, and it is very timely that you brought it up, because I was thinking about something that I said, oh, I should have said this, I didn't, so it gives me this opportunity. Studies that are conducted across the world show that when you provide people with negative information about any group, a minority group, based on religion, ethnicity, sect, whatever religious sect, it is really easy to persuade them to become intolerant, as opposed to persuade them to become tolerant. So unfortunately, the far-right parties have the upper hand when it comes to persuasion. That is precisely why we cannot stop humanizing them. We cannot stop showing the different angles of the issue. We cannot stop talking about what a refugee is, why people come. For instance, why do migrants from Afghanistan came and when they were predominantly men? What was the story behind it? Because it was a very dangerous road that they didn't want to take with their families. Or why the Syrian refugees, all of them have very smart phones, because that is all their investment for their migration trajectory. That is how they move, that is how they communicate with the diaspora, that is how they pay the smugglers if they do. So we need to know that we should not stop listening to the stories and communicating the stories, because it is those stories that will make people realize that maybe it's not a crisis and we can govern this. And I think the Ukrainian refugee crisis, in quotation mark, has shown us this when we sit down with a sober mind and try to increase our capacity as opposed to, scare away and create this dystopic stories. We can do it. Yes, we can. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Hüseyinov, you mentioned the war in 2020. And we have seen actually both in that war and the Ukrainian-Russia war is the instruments that countries use in the war is changing. And information warfare is part of that. And we have known before that the first victim of the wars are usually the truth. And we have seen this in the Azerbaijan-Armenistan war as well. So tell us how Azerbaijan dealt with the information warfare and tried to make its story to be heard around the world. How Azerbaijan achieved this?
Thank you very much for the question. Actually, Patriotic War of 2020 was not limited in the battlefield only, as you mentioned, but also there was a very heavy information war against Azerbaijan, but which started actually 30 years ago. I will just bring you one example. Azerbaijan as a country which just regained its independence following the collapse of Soviet Union back in 1993, was the first among newly established states to be imposed sanctions by United States Congress. There was a famous amendment to Freedom Support Act 907, according to which any direct assistance from US government to Azerbaijan was prohibited. And that was imposed against a country which was subject to aggression, subject to occupation, had the largest influx of refugees and internally displaced persons among all ex-USSR countries. And that was a result of fake information, of misuse of information by Armenian diaspora, which managed to convince US congressmen that it was actually Azerbaijan who was blockading Armenia and who was attacking Armenia. And of course, this information war has even more intensified during 44-day Patriotic War. And our president, Supreme Commander-in-Chief, also proved to be the best strategic communicator leader in this. In the course of 44-day patriotic war, our president gave intensive interviews to more than 30 leading world media agencies, TV agencies, including, of course, agencies from our brotherly state of Turkey, which was instrumental actually in bringing truth information to the attention of the world community. And of course, assistance and support of our journalists from brotherly Turkey was invaluable. I can just again bring one example. Fulya Öztürk, CNN Turkey reporter, who was there when indiscriminate shelling of civilian population in the second largest city of Azerbaijan, Ganja, took place, and when she took innocent baby, already dead. And that was, of course, a very strong message to the world community about atrocities, about crime committed by Armenians against civilian population, against cities which are very far from line of contact. That's in brief.
And my last question to İpek Hanım, you mentioned the state-society relation and how it can be fixed through different strategies. But we are going through one of the most polarized moments of probably history. In each and every country, election results show that. And we are not even talking about polarization anymore, we are talking about calcification among certain segments of the population. And we have seen this in pandemic actually. In a rather short period of time, we have seen that wearing mask could be a political symbol. So tell us how a state can achieve the desired results that you mentioned, considering the existence of such a polarization within the society. Can a state, by using the channels that you mentioned, reach to two different poles of the society?
Obviously, yes, this is a very good question. Yes, indeed. So I would say there is many tools that we have to use, and we need to use all the multiple communication strategies in order to convey our messages. So I would say, yes, we have to use all different players, different actors when the state wants to transfer the message and wants to transfer their policies to the society. So here I would like to give an example that Turkey has done quite well during the pandemic compared to Europe. We were in uncertain times, we were in the times of not being guided well from the governments, especially in the European Union. So I would say that being connecting to people and understanding and using different players on the ground will definitely lead us to the success when we want to transfer our messages.
Thank you very much, İpek Hanım. And this is now, I think the time is up. There will be a next panel right now. Go ahead. Just
last but not least, as we're approaching end of this year's summit, and in a matter of few weeks we're approaching year end, I would like to take this opportunity to wish you all and your loved ones very best for Happy New Year. And as year 2023 is of particular importance for our brotherly Republic of Turkey, and it will be 100 years anniversary since the establishment of Turkey Cumhuriyeti, I would like to take this opportunity to wish nation and state of our brotherly Turkey peace and prosperity. Thank you very much.
And please join me to thank our panelists one more time, and thank you for being here and attending this panel.
Kılıç, thank you very much. I second that. Peter, Başak, İpek, and Fuat, thank you very much. Do appreciate your presence and for the talk. So. Ağzına sağlık. Teşekkür ederim. Teşekkürler. Sağ olun. Mersi. Thank you. Fuat. Thank you. All right, we're going to take a very short coffee break. If you're in need of a cold or hot beverage, please help yourselves out into the foyer. We will begin in exactly 10 minutes. If you feel that you don't need a beverage, I would recommend that you stay in the auditorium. But we'll begin in 10 minutes exactly. Thank you very much. Enjoy the short break.
I'll be no good if I can tell you. Just keep our feelings to myself.